It was a good lesson. We'll get there. I'm very pleased with our last quarterly, and I'm getting pleased with this one. So. Praise God. Lord, thank you for the prayer. Lord, thank you for this Sabbath day. Thank you for the opportunity to come and find each other and to worship you and to learn and to share. The lessons you have for us continue through the centuries to have meaning. It's a simple message. It's a complex message. This week we're going to talk about the simplicity of how it comes from us. Rather than complexity. Amen. The message of the cross. Call that the central thing. The cross right over here. Well, food's pretty good. Air conditioner works. But the cross is what we're reading. The message of the cross. The text, or the number text, is from 1 Corinthians 1:18. So the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. A lot said in those two lines. Like so many other things, the Bible, so much meaning is packed, so few words. So let's talk about the memory text. What does that mean? I'll share what it means to me, but let's go first. What does it mean to you? What does that text mean?
1 Corinthians
1:18. Maybe I'll start out with a more basic question. What is the message of the cross?
Salvation for those who are lost. With it being foolishness, the problem is a lot of people don't think they're lost. They're relying on themselves.
Okay, so you can quite hear everything. The salvation is the message of the cross is salvation.
Salvation to those who are lost. And with the foolishness part, a lot of people don't think they're lost.
Yeah. Those who are perishing. We spent some time talking about what the Greek meant with the perishing. There are a lot of people in this world that think, I'm doing okay. I'm not making all the plans. I'm doing okay. I am doing okay. Are they lost? If they think that, they probably are. Am I doing okay? Me. I want your opinion. Am I doing okay? You can hit no. I'm a sinner. Oh, thanks. That's a compliment. Meaningless, but thank you. I appear to be doing okay. But I'm a sinner. I'm lost. I'm without salvation. I'm perishing. And that is the message of the cross. Okay? So if I'm perishing and I don't have salvation, what is the message of the cross to me? Nothing. It seems to be foolishness. We're talking about that a lot.
It's especially foolishness to the Roman world, because the Roman conception of religion is that our gods are the best because we conquer the world. So our gods are better than your gods.
Yes.
And there was no such thing as like love or passion towards your God. It was the duty towards God. You have duties to do certain things, and God bless you in those duties.
And would punish you if you did, right?
And so the Roman conception of the cross it is foolishness. If your God got conquered by Rome, well then
that gets brought up later in the lesson. But no, that's why we bring it up now, because it gets covered. One of the things, to steal my own thunder here, yes, it was foolishness to the Roman world, but in the lesson it says it was even more foolishness to the Jewish world. What was the Messiah supposed to do? Was the Messiah supposed to be crucified on the cross?
He was
supposed to conquer the Romans, and yet because of the Romans he's crucified. That's utterly ridiculous if you're using man's thinking.
And the cross was the most important way to die at that time.
Long death. Painful death. Shameful death.
And it was the lowest of the low. I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't the normal way to kill people.
No.
It was for those that were so evil in the eyes of Rome.
The use of the cross was meant to prove a point. It wasn't just, okay, you have done this crime, whatever that crime happened to be, you want to be executed. It wasn't meant to be a swift and painless execution. It was meant to be a lesson for everyone else. Look at what we will do to somebody who crosses us. We will humiliate them. Yeah, we'll put them through torture. Provide this lingering death. Can't imagine that.
And even if you think about the way the world works, like when Jesus said, the meek shall inherit the earth, that's the opposite of how we think. Like, meek is weak. You need to be strong, you need to take, but no one's going to give it to you. You can go and take it, and conquer, and be strong. But if you think about it, look at like someone like Julius Caesar, who was divine for the Romans. He conquered all these nations, he won the throne, essentially, right? But in the end, his ambition got himself killed. But if you look at Jesus, he laid down his life. And even though they're taunting him to come off the cross, his very enemies were killing him and saying, well, come off the cross and we'll believe you. Any one of us would have been like, if we were in Jesus' position and had his power, we would have said, okay, you want me to come off the cross? So, believe me now, But Jesus remains, and really, he looks weak to the world in that moment because he's dying. And yet he's the strongest anyone's ever been because he's going through the worst experience anyone has ever gone through with the sins of the world upon him, and yet he remains. He does not come down, even though he said, I can call 12 legions of angels to come rescue you if that's what I want. And so it's actually, meekness is the greatest strength one can have. So it looks foolish by the world's standards, but that's because the world is backwards.
That's part of that verse. But to us who are being saved, meaning the power, the message of the cross, is the power of God. A lot of the lesson deals with 1 Corinthians 17 to 31, 1 Corinthians 1. I highlighted a lot of things this week. But I think we should read that. 1 Corinthians 1, 17 through 31. The lesson goes back and forth, referring to this particular group of verses over. So, this is Paul speaking. For Christ sent me not to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom of words, lest the cross of Christ should be made of none effect. So as we start the reading here, the importance of the cross of Christ is brought by Paul. What's more important than wisdom of words? And you can't lose the effect of the cross of Christ. But the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, so memory text. But unto us which are saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For after that, in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. It pleased God by the foolishness of preachers to save them that believe. For the Jews require a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified. Unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness. But unto them which are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men. And it talks about that later. Well, does God have a lot of foolishness? I don't think so. But the point is, the most foolishness of God, which doesn't exist, but if God was foolish, he would still be far wiser than we, the wisest of us. Okay, that's just to set the parameters. The foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is God weak? No, of course not. But the weakest part of God is stronger than the strongest of us. The weakness of God is stronger than men. For you see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. Okay, we'll get back to that. But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. And base things of the world, the things which are despised, God hath chosen. Yea, the things which are not, to bring to naught things that are. That no flesh should glory in his presence. That of him I believe in Christ Jesus, who God has made unto us wisdom, and righteousness, and sanctification, and redemption. That according as it is written, he that glorieth, that glories in the Lord. Okay, we're not going to get all that covered. Let's just face that. There's less stuff in those verses. But let's talk about it. Let us reason together. Sunday's lesson, I didn't think a word was out of place. I thought this is good. In those verses, Paul deals with the contrast between human foolishness and divine wisdom. The cross is the power to display the worst of man and the best of God. I hadn't thought of that concept before. But the worst of man is in the cross. What man did to Jesus, the only innocent person that's ever lived. The worst of man is right there. At the same time, the best of God is right there. What better exemplifies God's love? God's willingness to suffer for us for what we've done. The worst of man and the best of God, right there. This section of 1 Corinthians is introduced by the statement in 1:17. Because the cross of Christ is not supposed to be empty of its power, the message of the cross must occupy the central place of our preaching. Paul says he was not sent to baptize, but to preach the gospel of Christ. And that statement requires two important observations. We talk about the Greek verb apostello, which is to stem, and that stems from the same root as the word apostle. Thus, Paul's fundamental apostolic task was the proclamation of the gospel. Second, Paul's words about baptism did not mean that baptism is not important, or at least not as important as preaching. He was instead rebuking those who made a big deal out of who were the ones he were to baptize, as opposed to the one, Jesus, in whom they had been baptized. By wisdom of words, Paul is not implying that eloquent speeches are bad in themselves. But the point he's making is that human wisdom should not obscure the message of the cross. And it can. We can get wrapped up in our eloquence. The message is what's important, not necessarily the fancy talk of cash. The point is that human wisdom should not obscure the cross. This phrase refers to Greco-Roman rhetoric. Now, they were good at talking, weren't they? They were good at parsing the details of whatever religious subject they were talking about. In Athens, Paul used logic, science, and philosophy, but this resulted in no fruit. Didn't get a lot done. So when he went to Corinth, he decided to follow another path of labor in his efforts to arrest the attention of the careless and the indifferent. Not something to think about too. Careless and indifferent. We're surrounded by people that are careless and indifferent. It's time to let them careless and indifferent. Help me. He determined to avoid elaborate arguments and discussions. You get wrapped up in that? In elaborate arguments? He determined not to know anything among the Corinthians, quote, save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. It ended up working, didn't it? And history tells us that some were saved. Question at the bottom of the page. I'm asking this question to you folks. In what ways can elaborate discourses obscure the message of the cross?
Well, you give lots of room for disagreement, like on the fine points of detail. Well, that's not entirely true. Well, what about this? Well, you're not actually talking about crossing, we're not going about this whole detail that you mentioned over here. And why I kind of disagree with that. And you make it all intellectual rather than, hey, you sinned, Christ died, and because you sinned, what are you going to do about it? You know? It's like a much simpler, to the point, this gets to the heart of the matter rather than this kind of intellectual exercise that some people might enjoy doing, but they never get to the heart.
And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it can't obscure the actual message. It's very simple. Man sinned, which means I sinned, which means you sinned. God told us, what's the penalty of sin? It's death. Christ died, paid that penalty. If we accept it, we're saved. Simple. Very simple, very straightforward. You can argue with that? Let's argue. Let's argue about it. How can anyone tell me that they haven't sinned? Anyone in this room are nice people? Anyone in here want to say, I haven't sinned? But you're lying as you say that, so that's a sin, so don't bother. So you can't argue that one. Christ died. Well, somebody might try to argue that one. There's historical evidence of Jesus Christ being crucified. There's faith, but there's historical evidence. That's a hard one. Now, I suppose they could argue that the penalty of sin shouldn't be death. That was stated by God. Very, very clearly. But I suppose they could argue that. But
just, I mean, you can argue those things, but the point is still that you're getting to the point, which is your heart, which is conviction of sin. Like, you can argue all you want, but look around in the world. Why isn't it the way it should be? We all know, we all recognize this is not the way it should be. Why? You know? Well, it's because people do things the wrong way. What would we call that? Sin. And have you ever done anything the wrong way? Have you ever offended people in your life? Have you ever messed things up? You're going to tell me that you never, if you could just take the word sin out of it, like, things aren't the way they should be, and it's because people don't do it the way it should be done. And have you ever done that? You know, and I don't think anyone can say, no, I've always been perfect my whole life, never hurt anyone.
But the elaborate discourse can give you wiggle room to talk around that. So, the next question that they ask, I think we've probably already answered it. Why did the proclamation of Jesus Christ and Him crucified, that Paul made that proclamation, why did that produce more fruit in Corinth than logic, science, and philosophy did in Athens? I think we just answered that question. Logic, science, and philosophy has a lot of room. Jesus Christ and Him crucified. A fool can argue that, I guess. But even that fool knows that he's being a fool as he argues that, whether he admits it or not.
Well, the truth is more powerful.
And we do all recognize the truth. Essentially. We might not want to word is the frontal lobe. I don't know. Parts of our brain want to deny the truth.
Because by accepting the truth, it means you have to change.
Well, we have to recognize our own flaws, which it's uncomfortable. The truth is uncomfortable. But if you accept it, it's actually the most comfortable place to be. And once again, He has a handle on iron. Well, the last question that they asked was, might there, however, be times when logic, philosophy, and science would be helpful to finding the gospel? Suppose.
I think I heard someone say this once when they're talking about doing like Bible work, or so do Bible studies, and they were saying you have to discern between a question that's an honest objection, like you presented this new information to me, what about this? And they act, it's an honest objection. If you could answer that, they would move forward. So answer that question with logic, science, reason, whatever. You have to discern between that and the other question, which is, I know this is true, but I'm looking for an excuse to not. And so then, he said, with those questions, you don't answer those questions. You bring them back to the decision.
That would just obscure the message.
Right, and he said you bring them back to a decision. You need to make a decision on this. You already know what the truth is. Well, what about, how am I going to, what? Okay, are you going to follow God, or are you not going to follow God? And so there's a difference between those two kinds of questions.
Well, logic is not in opposition. God is logical. God is all that is logical. All the lies that are told that are opposed to God are not logical. Belief in God is pragmatic. And when you talk about the philosophy of the world that believes in God is healthier, it's happier, it's better for our world, it's better for those around us. You can't find anything wrong with that. There's plenty of other philosophies that you can point out. If you want to argue about those, how they harm others and how they harm the people that believe in that. A healthy philosophy, God flourishes in that. And then science. Once again, is science ever? The only things that try to disprove God are lies.
I think with science, I mean, when you really break down science, it proves God more than disproves God.
Absolutely.
Because there's such an order that was created.
Absolutely. History. You look at all the history. or the archaeological evidence that's being discovered, that doesn't dispute the Bible, it confirms the Bible. The Bible gives us scientific truths that this world, the wisdom of men, denied. In fact,
there is, with the Bible and archaeology, that puts the Bible on such a high pedestal because archaeology can disprove it, but nothing archaeological that has been found has ever disproved anything in the Bible.
in Genesis, we're told that this world is, or our worlds were hung in oil. The flat earthers were the wisdom of men at that time, and there's still some that believe it. We're an oil. We're a globe. The science at one point in time would have said no. I mean, it was a revelation. Was it Galileo first? Oh, I don't know. But the Bible told us we were hung as an oil.
I would say there is a logic, though, to Satan's very good at reasoning. He's very good at it. He's good at creating a system that is logical within itself. And so when you look at it, you're like, it's all logically fits together, but it's based like on a false premise or something. And so you got to be careful because logic and reason alone won't necessarily bring you to the truth.
No.
It'll bring you to, like Paul says that even the Gentiles can know just from nature that there is a God, that he's powerful, and that there's a judgment for sin. So you can come to those, but to come to the conclusion that God is full of grace or love, that he would give his son to die for you, those are things that reason alone are not going to bring you to. You need revelation to show you that, to reveal it to you. That's why Jesus said, no one knows the Father but the Son, and to him the Son reveals him to you. So there is something about God that must be revealed, that logic and reason alone won't bring you to.
Right. Well, and okay, there's
But those things are reasonable even after they're revealed. So,
yes,
so reason is still there.
and there's superficial logic, which Satan is excellent at manipulating. But then there's a deeper logic, and we'll get to that, talking about how the message of the cross, how that was not popular, was not expected, it's completely unexpected, and it seems on the surface to be illogical. But then when you dig deeper, how else was God going to pay for our sins? I can't. I've done worse than I would. I can't be punished enough for what I've done. But when Jesus suffered for me, I can pay that debt. I can't pay the debt. So if you get to that deeper level of logic, it continues to work. We're actually, we're following the lesson that Mondays, again, I highlighted everything. The lesson asks us to read again some of the verses that I just read. The title is Foolishness to Those Who Are Perishing. My ancient Greek is impressive because I never learned it. The Greek word for foolishness in 1 Corinthians 1:18 is Moriah. Perhaps it's pronounced. I found this interesting. This word, this Greek word, occurs only five times in the New Testament. And all of those are in 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 1, 18, 21, 23. 1 Corinthians 2, 14, and 1 Corinthians 2, 19. Apart from that word, Moriah, other words from the same family occur numerous times, but that particular word is only used in 1 Corinthians. And it goes on to say that reference to foolishness was not meant to be denigrating to the Corinthians' intellectual capacity, because for the Corinthians, well, they were prideful of their intellectual capacity. It was a sophisticated center of the world. It was
And great educational science.
Yes.
neutral.
So all of us, when he was talking about the foolishness, he wasn't trying to lessen what they did have, but he was trying to direct their attention to their unwillingness to consider the truth of the gospel. And that's not uncommon. In the educated fools of the world, the more educated you are, frequently that person is less willing to accept truths, especially simple truths, basic truths, truthful truths.
In a lesson that I watched on that, I don't know if it's in the book, but the culture in those days to be crucified, is that what you're talking about, the crucifixion?
Not yet.
It was like for the lower class, it was.
We have talked about it,
yeah, okay, sorry. I was like, it really hit me that we look at the cross different than what they did. Their culture.
Well, because we recognize that God saved God. And so therefore, we recognize the power of God in Him. So, I like the way they set this up. Think about Paul's situation in the city. He's just come from Athens. It's one of Corinth. He comes to a place that prides itself on its own so-called knowledge, wisdom, and cultural sophistication. In this context, he talks about a Galilean Jew, Jesus of Nazareth, who had been crucified by the Romans and raised from the dead, all in order to pay for not only their sins, but for the sins of the world. And then in italics, our writer assumes what they're thinking in Corinth, and the questions he may have asked is, can this guy be serious? Who's he kidding? What? You're talking about a Galilean Jew crucified by the Romans and then raised from the dead, and that's supposed to pay for not only the sins of the Jews, but for the sins of all of us? Seems a little far-fetched, based on the wisdom of man. It does seem far-fetched. And it wasn't some deep new philosophical concept that could be parsed and analyzed by philosophical tools. To the Corinthians, it seemed to be lunacy, nonsense, nothing that any smart and educated Corinthian could take seriously. And then, the lesson goes on to say, and as foolish as Paul's message sounded to the pagans, for many of the Jews, the message of the cross sounded worse. Was there a Jew that was expecting the Messiah to be executed by Rome? The Messiah was supposed to overthrow the Romans, not to be crucified by them. The message was ludicrous to the Greeks, but to the Jews it was, use the word abhorrent, yeah. Somebody who's crucified, that's not going to be that's not a Messiah. How is that person going to be us? Thus, from the start, Paul had a lot going against him in Corinth, and yet, despite all this, souls, both Jewish and Gentile, were won for the gospel. And what's the message in that? Which we talk about anyway. What a difficult situation Paul is facing.
What's interesting that the argument Paul makes is that to the Jews it was something like the Greeks foolishness, but to those who are called Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God, and the wisdom of God. So the argument Paul is making is that the Jews are looking for power. The Greeks are looking for wisdom. Those are the things they value. So the Jews, that's why the Jew asks for a sign. Show us that you have power. And that's why the Greeks say, well, what's your new theory? Show us that you have wisdom. Do you agree with Aristotle? Do you have better than that? Whatever. And to them, they're looking at it from the world's perspective. We want worldly power. We want worldly wisdom. And when Jesus comes with heaven's power, he is power, he is what they're looking for, but he has it in a way that they're not looking for it. And so they reject it, but there are some who are called, he says, will be victories, who when they look at Christ, they see, that's what I've been looking for. There's the power. I need power over sin in my heart, not over the Roman who's oppressing me. Or that's the wisdom I need, wisdom to be right with God, not so I can show off and show everyone how much I know. And so it's just amazing to me that the thing they are looking for, they reject because it doesn't quite meet their expectations, but it's what they're looking for. But it requires a denial of self that makes it an obstacle, a stumbling block, that makes it so it's, well, that must be foolishness. Because I couldn't have to deny myself, I couldn't have to die to myself. You know, and that's the thing that stops people from getting what they're looking for, what they want. Everyone wants heaven. Everyone wants Jesus, really. There's something in them that wants that. They have eternity in their hearts. But it's the denial of self aspect of the cross, right? It's offensive to us. Because it means I have to die. Christ died for me, I have to die. That's what makes it rejected.
Well, it's interesting that you say that one is looking for power, one is looking for wisdom. Because when Jesus was on earth, all the power he showed while his healing, and then all the people that were so amazed when he spoke, he was displaying power and wisdom. But the only thing that people can concentrate on is, well, he died. Where was the power and wisdom to save himself from the cross?
And from our standpoint, if I have power, I'm going to use it for my benefit. Jesus chose to use his power for my benefit. So I'm weak. He is strong.
People don't see that the power that kept him on that cross was the love for us. The love was so powerful that it kept him on the cross. And he didn't use his heavenly power to come off the cross.
If he would have done that, then they would have followed him. But because that's the power they want. They want power to save themselves, not to die itself.
But they really would have been following our Lord. They would have been following him. I've imagined Gethsemane, I've imagined Golgotha, I've imagined the angels talking to God about it. Can we do something here? This is our Lord. Can't we go save him? Please, God. And I that's in my mind. I fantasize that the angels are trying to talk God into it. Okay, I know this was your plan, but come on, let's do something.
But we can apply it a little bit closer to home because how many times today do people become Christians, follow Jesus because they're looking for a Savior who will allow them to preserve themselves. They want a Savior who will save them. And yes, we all want that, but what I mean is like save them in their current state.
Yes.
Save them from the consequences of their sins, but not from the sin itself. Whereas what Jesus wants to do is save you from yourself, from sin, not in yourself, and from the consequences of your sin. And so it's just, we do the same thing to this day, and it's a daily battle. One day you could be saying, you know, God, okay, I surrender. And the next day you take it back and say, no, I want to keep you in the
Well, I surrender some stuff, but
yeah. But we try to apply Jesus to our way.
you think we learn no lesson on that. The paragraph at the bottom of Monday's lesson. Whatever opposition we face, this is in terms of, I think, in terms of preaching the cross of Christ crucified. God is people who are open to hearing the truth. We must be ready to be used by Him to reach these people wherever they are. Even in places today that are as bad as or even worse. Corinth doesn't seem like a right field. I mean, looking at it from the outside, looking at it from what I know about this, that's not. How well are you going to do there, Paul? He did okay. He saved some souls. Some Jews, some Greeks. Against all odds. Oh, really? forgetting the power of God. If you think about what that's about. So that's Monday's lesson. Going outside and watch someone ring the bell. Oh. And going forward, we just talk some more. Johnny doesn't know this close to bring the kids back to bed. But that, maybe I should try to find some kind of conclusion there.
Even the truth is hard to hear. I mean, even when Jesus spoke, he had so many disciples leave him because they're like, this is a hard teaching. And he looked at the 12 and he was like, you want to leave also? And they said, no.
Where would we go?
Yeah.
There is no place. This is the message of the cross and Christ crucified is the only message that exists that has any chance of salvation for us. Where would we go? It wasn't pleasant then necessarily. It wasn't what we wanted. It wasn't what we expect. Sometimes the best gifts we receive aren't expected. That was the best gift I ever received. Scott brought up Jews and man science, Greeks seek wisdom. The cross, the idea of God, the Messiah being crucified, was not a sign that the Jews had expected, nor was it the kind of wisdom that the Greeks wanted. It went against everyone's expectations. So, what are our expectations worth in the grand scheme of things? No. God overwhelms our expectations with his power. The crucified Messiah was something completely unexpected by the Jews and the Greeks. What does this tell us about the fact that God does not always act the way we expect? Isn't that wonderful? If God acted in the way we expected him to act, it wouldn't work. My expectations are weak. What?
I was just going to say, it shows he's so much wiser than us. He knows what's best for us, and everyone around us.
We see that through the last book, dimly, but we do see that. Oh yeah, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I expected. That's not what I hoped for. It was better. And back then, that's not what they expected, wanted, or hoped for. It was better. That's the way God does things. And is this an important concept to grasp? I think it is. And that would help us to be grateful in the midst of our tribulations. If we realize that God has always done what is best. It may not seem that way, it may not be what we want, but it's always been the best. No reason to think it won't be going forward. I'm going to think about this lesson a lot. I'm not done thinking about it. That would probably should move on to this. Anyone have any other closing thoughts, or I'll send it for Lord, thank you for your message, the message of the cross and Christ crucified. It's a simple message. It's a logical message. Lord, I sinned. I deserve to die. You died for me. You're finally saved. It doesn't take a lot of thinking. But we can think about it a lot and still come back to it's solid. It is logical. It's real. It is powerful. Lord, thank you for using your power for my salvation. Thank you for using your power for the salvation of those that I love. Thank you for using your power for the salvation of all people that don't even know They're my brothers, they're my sisters. Thank you. Amen.